So I thought we'd start our discussion with the Battle of Fallujah with a quote from a book I read by Bing West on Fallujah, and it kind of gives us a kind of a basis of what we're dealing with. He says, ask Iraqis about Fallujah, and they roll their eyes. Fallujah is a strange, sullen, wild-eyed, badass, just plain mean place. Fallujahans don't like strangers, which includes anyone not homebred. That brings us to the question, guys, of modern wargaming and how comfortable you guys feel when you've served time in the military, you've been in combat, you've been out there, and now you're kind of repeating it again on the tabletop. What do you guys think of that?
It's a healthy way to get it out sometimes, perhaps.
Therapeutic.
Yeah. Especially when we're able to share the table with non-veterans. I have no problem with it whatsoever. Yeah.
There's not a moral distinction of one being right or one being wrong. And a clear example of this is that modern militaries, including the U.S. military, they use war games as part of training tools. I mean, that's just widespread. I worked directly for Sergeant Major of SOI. He had tens of thousands of toy soldiers. He was a combat veteran from a couple different deployments, and he did this too. But when the question comes to modern wargaming, I think it ends up being a personal perspective. I mean, for me, I have a difficult time wargaming the first Persian Gulf War, what we call it, Desert Storm, Desert Shield. And I didn't fight in it, but that's why I have trouble gaming it. Because I feel, honestly, for me, I feel guilty because I should have participated in that conflict. A lot of Marines that I knew participated in that conflict, and I feel very, very strange about gaming it. Now, a fictional war like Cold War, 1989, 1990, that didn't actually happen, I have no qualms whatsoever fighting a game with that. But yeah, it bothers me personally. It's more difficult for me to game conflicts that I should have been a part of or could have been a part of. Maybe that's a better way of expressing it.
I'm often torn on it. There'll be certain games or certain incidents within a game that they'll ping a memory, but it doesn't make me uncomfortable. It just reminds me. Wargaming modern stuff doesn't bother me at all. In fact, I find it kind of interesting because I get to be the bad guy. I get to be the insurgent. I also get to see, like when I play the insurgent, I have the knowledge that I have from being a U.S. soldier, and I play against other U.S. soldiers, or Marines, sorry. I'm a U.S. soldier.
That's right. I'm not insulting.
Nobody's perfect.
So it's kind of interesting to see that. And then when I play against people who don't have combat experience and they're playing either side, it's always interesting to see where our biases are due to our experience in our training. Like,
yes, that is an interesting thing.
Like, we'll set up like, okay, they're going to come down this road. It's an MSR. They have to come down this road. So we'll focus all our forces there. And then it turns out these guys don't think about MSRs. Like, yeah, we're just going to go down every other road. And you're like,
Yeah, it doesn't bother me too much, but it does definitely bring back memories, and I find it also therapeutic and also fascinating to observe everyone else's behaviors. Some of those who were non-combat, they have a different perspective and come at the battle or the game at a different angle, and that's always fun to watch. But yeah, I mean, it's good to process all that stuff out, and I think wargaming can do that.
Not automatically, no. Again, I'd say that all you have to do is look at the real militaries around the world. They all use war games, and they certainly aren't using war games to trivialize it. They're doing it to learn, to practice, to demonstrate in some cases. I think you could use a game to trivialize actual war, but that's going to be you as the gamer. How do you approach that game?
I think it's a very personal thing if you're approaching it from that angle. But the feel that I've always gotten at the club, and maybe that's why we're members and we're here, is that it's not that. I don't get that things are being minimalized or trivialized. It's usually we do it with respect, and we have good discussions around it, and it's helpful for me.
Yeah, you can do the what if thing a lot too. Like, for instance, if you game out a scenario where one particular side did not have success, what could you do different to get a different result? And
that's what comes down to a lot of wargaming is you're because you maybe not with ultra modern wargaming. I'm not always playing the Americans.
Yeah.
So it changes my objectives, and it does change your view where you're trying to make the guys win, and you see what they had to go through in a very small, simplified scale. I don't feel it trivializes it as long as you're not purposely doing it to trivialize, if that makes sense. It's,
Yeah.
You could almost. I guess you could do it. I haven't seen it done, but you could almost do it in a mocking way.
Yeah.
Some of the scenarios could be so fanciful with them, and it could appear mocking.
Yeah.
And we don't do that. So
To me, it's really no different than running a multiplayer sand table. You guys are familiar with that? Yeah. To me, it's no different than that. It's as long as you're not purposely making it, like you said, purposely mocking it, it's fine. It's just as long as you understand what you're doing. You got to understand that some people will view it as mocking. You have to understand that you are gaming real events, and that because it is so recent in our memory, it's easier to forget, if that makes sense. Like when you're doing Austerlitz, you're talking about this massive battle, and it's easy to just kind of ignore it. Whereas with ultra modern,
we can't ask Napoleon what he thinks.
Yeah.
But you know what? It's interesting. This question doesn't just apply to Americans. There's some examples I can think of, like for the United States, without naming names, but you can verify this. There are at least 2 very large wargaming miniatures companies run by Vietnam veterans. There was another company that was run by a guy who fought in Grenada, and there's lots of veterans in the wargaming industry. And these are guys, and some of them are definitely combat veterans, and they decided that that's what they were going to do as their living, was to make war games. But also, it's not an American question because I have an interest in the Falklands War, a war that I would have been too young for anyway, and that I didn't fight in because I was neither an Argentine nor a Brit. But in Argentina, Argentina as well, but in Great Britain, there are a number of wargamers who served during the Falklands conflict. And if you look at posts on forums, you realize that they struggle with the same question, is that some of them can game the Falklands and some of them can't. And it's all a personal choice. So this isn't an American phenomenon, and this isn't a phenomenon directly or only associated with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. It happens to everybody.
I think that as long as the war is still within memory, that this question's going to come up. These questions of, are we mocking it? Is it trivializing? Is it uncomfortable? Because once that memory falls off, like World War I doubt there's many people that have a problem with wargaming World War I, because it doesn't have that memory. It's not still alive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it comes down to just if you processed it or not. How well have you processed it?
Something that I think modern wargaming rules can't do well is vehicles. Tanker, love tanks, long, to me, like infantry guys talk about 800 meters being a long range engagement. That's point blank range for me. So it'll be very difficult to do a modern heavy force on force engagement on a table. We need the whole entire floor
we need to
do realistic ranges, So vehicle on vehicle combat modern on the table is going to be very difficult, I think.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
For me, it's something that I know they'll never be able to put into a game. First off, line of sight drives me nuts in games, because it's like, we use true line of sight. No, you don't. You don't. Because there's no true line of sight. I might spot your elbow peeking out from a corner, and it's a flash to everyone else, but I might be like, there's somebody there. And there's no way to actually game that.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and this, I'm sure you guys have probably been taught this, the U.S. military believes in the sixth sense. They really do. Mm-hmm. They teach you, like, when you're watching somebody, you're in a clandestine position, don't look at them in the eyes, don't look at their face, because you know when somebody's staring at you, and you'll put them on alert. There's no way to add that to a game. There's no way to add the fact that you know somebody's pointing a rifle at you. You might not see them, you might not know where they are, but you feel like an itch on your spine where you know somebody's pointing a rifle at you. There's no way to game that. There's no way to game that whole feeling of, before you go out on patrol, shit's going to kick off. I know this. I feel it. We're going to get in contact. So you're already amped up and prepared. There's no way to game that because it's just impossible. And I think that's a large part of combat, is that not knowing but knowing. And there's just legitimately no way to.
There was something else that, for wargamers would understand this. I don't think anybody outside the wargaming genre would quite get this. But you see sometimes at war games, people will bring accoutrements. They'll bring, gear. Now, you know what I'm talking about now. Yeah. Well, most war gamers don't bring this kind of stuff. The game gets kind of out of hand. But like
I'm winning.
And I'll use this example. We do World War II gaming, and there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, for a guy gaming and running Germans. Example. But I want to say this: if you're a war gamer, you go to a convention, you're going to see a few guys who get a little out of hand with that. And I don't know if this is a good example or not, but I was thinking about something that we used to do for OPFOR. Is you go to wargaming conventions, you see guys wearing, like, say, a pith hat because they're doing British colonials, or you see World War II gear of some kind or another. If I were to go to a war game like the one that we have today, go ahead and put this on before we gamed. I mean, this immediately, I would think, would have a reaction from people.
Yeah.
And this is where a point where you could consider that you could cross a line that perhaps would be found offensive by at least some people. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that, by the way. I mean, for the record, this is not something I would feel comfortable doing.
Is that why you brought it to do?
Yeah.
To play today?
Yeah.
But I don't know if that proves anything, but I think it's an interesting point that you do have to have some degree of respect. You have to have some degree of decorum.
To me, that bothers me less than I've seen dudes who show up in full Nazi regalia.
Yeah, it's hard, right?
Yeah, like that bothers me a lot less because there's a difference between, like, oh, I have a black t-shirt, let me tie it around my head, and somebody who has a full SS uniform. There's a different level of dedication.
Right,
there.
exactly.
Yeah,
A lot more
yeah,
time.
yeah.
Like, if you just wear, like, the cap, I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
If you're wearing the full SS uniform, you're a true believer.
Yeah.
Keep your eye on that guy.
Yeah, exactly. Then I'm uncomfortable gaming.
Yeah.
If you think a child showed up in a suicide bomber vest,
Yeah, that'd be bad.
but
Yeah.